Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to join Al and I to learn more about lived experience and person-centered practices. And one of the things that I really, really loved about what Al said was that people don't believe the achievements with people of lived experience. And for me, it was actually quite the opposite. Because I'm in a professional role now, people often didn't want to believe and still don't want to believe that I have lived experience. And people would say things like, do you really have lived experience? Like, how homeless were you? And I would be like, yeah, I couch surfed. I slept rough when I couldn't find a place to stay. There were times that I hid out in the high school and tried to stay away from the janitors so that they would lock me in and I'd have a warm place to sleep that night. So, sometimes just from the way people look or present, we make judgments and biases, and we don't always know people's story. The other thing I really loved what Al said was about maternal speak, because it's so easy to fall into that when we come into a caregiving role. And sometimes we just want to make sure that everything's okay. And we start talking like that. And we talk to people almost like they're children and that they don't have capacity to understand. And we have to be really, really careful of that. So thank you, Al, for bringing that up and coining the term maternal speak, because I think it can really resonate with many people. I know it certainly did with me. So for today, I'm going to talk with you guys just a small snapshot of my story. I don't want to tell the whole thing because this presentation really isn't about me and my lived experience, but it really helps to set the stage for what we're going to talk about. I want to talk to you about what person-centered means and the core concept of person-centered. And I really do mean person-centered, not client-centered. We often hear the term, oh, we're client-centered. We want to talk about being person-centered with every single member of your team, the landlord specialist, the team lead, the person with lived experience that's peer support, and all of the participants that we serve in our programs. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about peer support and the value of lived experience on teams and working to end homelessness. So a little bit about me. When I was 16 years old, I lost my mom in a car accident on the way to pick me up from my sister's graduation. My dad had been an alcoholic for many years and quite abusive. And we had grown up in our early years in a quite loving house that turned very chaotic over the years and damaging with lots of different traumas. My younger sister got taken to foster care. I hit the streets, and my older sister moved in with her boyfriend. And I got really used to people trying to tell me what I needed to do, what I should do to make my life better. And it wasn't until somebody talked to me and said, Carrie, you are worth so much more than the circumstances you've been born into and the things that have happened to you. Let me help you in a way that works for you. What's important to you? And that really was a game changer for me. Just having somebody listen instead of people saying, you need to do this. I know exactly how you feel. And I had a chip on my shoulder and I was one angry teenager. And for anybody to come and tell me that they knew how I felt made me even angrier, because I often thought, did your mom just die? Is your dad an alcoholic? Did you just lose your family? And that's where I would go to. So just thinking about that a little bit as we do this work, when we are tremendous caregivers and we want to do for people all the time. In order to set the stage for person-centered thinking, we really need to come from the perspective and understanding that every single person has infinite worth. And infinite really means ongoing and never ending. What is the infinite worth that each person in your program has? That each person who is doing this work has? That the peer specialist on your team has? Person-centered thinking skills really are a set of skills that reflect and reinforce values that help us support people rather than fix. So many times when I'm asked to give training, I hear, well, how do we fix this situation? We're solution focused. And I always pull it back to, it's not our job to fix people. Our job is to support them in whatever that looks like on a way that works for them. Being person-centered works at every single level of an organization, Even when you're having staff discrepancies and personnel problems, pulling it back and asking people what is important to you right now can make all the world of a difference when people feel heard and can have their truth told. It's the understanding that we're building a culture of learning and partnership together with shared accountability, and that every single person can learn and be successful. When we're doing this work and we're talking about peer support and we're talking about people with lived experience and helping to end homelessness, it's vitally important to ask yourself, what do we know before asking what we can do? We all got into this work because we care. We want to make a difference. We did not get into social work to make tons and tons of money. We did it to make society changes, systemic changes, changes in people's lives. And in doing so, often we find ourselves getting all the things that are really important for a person in place. We need to get them an income. We need to get them clothing. We need to get them furniture. We need to get them housed. And we get, and we do for people. But often we forget to pull it back and find out what's important to them. I'm going to frame this in an example. I was working with a lady, and I'm going to call her Chantel. Chantel had 5 kids, and she had left the reserve with her children because she wanted a better life for her children than she had experienced as a child. Pardon me. Chantel's rent was coming due, and I was her case manager, and I was really, really worried that she wasn't going to be able to pay her rent. And I kept talking to her, and she kept saying, Carrie, don't worry about it. I got this covered. 2 days after her rent was due, I stopped by her house, and I said, your landlord told me your rent was paid in full. And she told me, I told you I would get this covered. So I asked her how. And at first she didn't want to share. And then she said to me, do you really want to know? And I said, yeah, I do. And so she said to me that she goes and she takes orders from friends, family, and anybody else for things that they want. And she'll go to the store and steal brand name items. She'll then come back and sell them to them for half price. And that's how she makes her money. And so when I do this work and I ask people and groups, so what do you think you as a case manager would be responsible for doing in this situation? And often I hear, well, we need to inform her the rules of the law. We need to inform her of the consequences of stealing, and we need to inform. And there's an element there, sure. But before we start giving information and take her power away, assuming that she doesn't know those things, we need to find out, what does she know? We need to pull back and say, have you ever been arrested for shoplifting before? Has there been a time where they said you're going to do jail time if you get arrested again? And she answered yes to both of those things. And so then it pulls back to say, what's important to her? What are you going to do with your children? What plans do you have for them if you get arrested and go to jail? And that sat her back and said, well, I don't want to talk about this. A few days later, I visited her again, and she came and she said, Carrie, I really need to talk about this. I got really scared, the thought of going to jail and losing my kids, and I need to find a different way to feed my kids and make ends meet and pay rent. Because what was important to her is her children, putting a roof over their head, feeding them, and them not going back to the reserve. Because that's important to her, she's willing to look at some of the things that are important for her for change. The implementation of person-centered practices is a promise to listen. It's a promise to listen to what they're saying and what is meant by what they're saying. And to always find something we can do today or tomorrow, and to keep on acting on what we're hearing and not ignoring it and thinking, oh, they don't really need that, or they don't really mean that. It's more important that we work on this thing first. Because the core concept of being person-centered is the balance between what's important to somebody and what's important for them. Do you know what's important to every member of your team that you work with? What's important to the landlord specialist in the work that they do, in the peer support specialist in the work that they do, how they want to be communicated with, how they want to be a member of the team, and what works best for them? And from there, what's important for them to do then? And is that clear? Sorry about that. Important too is the things that you can't buy in stores. It's the things that make people's lives keep moving forward, their rhythm and pace of life. their status and control, people to be with, relationships, things to do, and places to go. It includes what people say with their words and with their behavior. And when the words and behavior are in conflict, we need to pay attention and listen to what the behavior is saying. And we need to ask what's going on there. Why is what they're saying and the way they're acting in conflict? If you're ever working with peer support or any other staff member, and you ask them what's the matter, and they say, nothing. Are you doing okay? Yep, fine. And their body bunches up and they pull back. What they're saying might be fine and nothing's wrong, but their body language might be telling us something different. And we need to pay attention to that and figure out what's going on in our team. Now, when we're talking about this work, it's not about all choice and no responsibility. There's always, in every choice we make, there's a responsibility that follows with that. Important 4 are the issues of health and safety and what others need. And we're really, really good as social workers and people in these roles to get the things that are important for people. We make sure they have harm reduction supplies. We make sure that they have food and that they have clothing and that they have shelter, that they're free from fear. And we're talking about those things, maybe treatment of illness, addictions, medication. But we need to understand that important 2 and 4 are connected. They influence one another constantly. And no one will do anything that's important for them willingly or for very long if there's not a piece of important to them in that. The balance of that is dynamic and it's always changing. Among the things that are important to us and the things that are important for us. Now, think about this even in context of your work. What's important to you? Why do you do this work every day? And from what's important to you, what's important for you? So it might be important to you to support people, to make a difference. And then maybe important for you is to show up for work, make sure you put your timesheets in, treat people with dignity and respect. The implementation of person-centered practices is a promise to be honest, to let people know that what they're telling us will take time. When we don't know how to help them get what they're asking for, when there's a big conflict and they want us to support with something that might be dangerous, or when it's just something we cannot do within our scope of work. Another example, and I like to share stories to put things in context, is a fellow that I worked with that was legally blind. There were no surgeries or anything that he could do in order to correct his vision. And when I first started working with him, he told me his goal was to get his driver's license. And I was like, well, I wanted to say, we can't do that. But instead, I stopped and pulled it back to say, what do I know? And I asked him, what's so important to you about getting your driver's license? And he kind of smirked at me as if he knew or he didn't know to say, like, that's not going to happen. But I asked him, what's important to you? And he took a big breath and he said, you know what, Carrie? Just want to feel that sense of independence. But I also just love the feeling of being behind a wheel and being in control. And sometimes I just feel helpless. And so we talked and we did some work, and the local fair was coming into town, the local circus with rides and things like that. And it took me a tremendous amount of talking to my team lead and my team to understand why I wanted to take the person I was working with to the local fair to do case management. And they kept telling me it was ridiculous and that's not what we do. But against all odds, I was able to do that. And I went to the fair with him, and he met 3 or 4 of his buddies, and they got in the bumper cars and they started driving around. And at first he was really tentative, and then they started just having a blast. And the fellow that I was working with was laughing and having a great time. And the guy running the rides allowed them to go on over and over and over for free. What that did there, and what he said to me, is somebody finally listened to me and was trying to help me in a way that worked for me. The fellow that I was working with had been in and out of housing options over the last 2 years, and nothing seemed to work, and it continued to fall apart. He's now in the same housing for probably going on 5, 6 years, 7 years. And he has said over and over, I just feel like somebody has listened. And that's really what being person-centered is about. Listening to what they're saying and then finding some sort of action that we can do to move forward. So I want you to take a moment, if you can, and just read this over and ask yourself and be really, really honest from your gut reaction. What does it feel like to be a member of your team? Do you feel energized and motivated to produce quality work? Do you feel trusted and have clear guidelines and freedom to produce innovative ideas and come up with some really cool stuff and people not just shut you down? Do you feel recognized and supported by the people around you? And if you have positive answers here, that is fantastic. If there's any element there that you're like, I would ask you what's important to you about that element that isn't so positive, and what do others on your team need to know to be able to support you differently? Now, think about this from a peer support's perspective. If you already have a person that is peer support on your team, think about these questions and think about how they might answer. And if they're answering everything in a positive way, that's fantastic. And if there's anything in there that they're answering in a way that maybe has some negative connotation, think about that and saying, what's important to them in each of these 4 categories, and how can we support them better? If you're thinking about putting peer support on your team, think about these questions and thinking about how you're going to address them to ensure that every single one of these is answered in a positive way, that people really feel supported and recognized and trusted and energized, and that they're a contributing member of your team. This is how we start removing our unconscious and conscious biases, to really look at it and see what skills, gifts, attributes each and every person brings to our team. Now, if you have a pen and paper, if you have the moment, sit back and take a minute and read these words. And how I want you to contextualize them and think about them is in relationship to your boss. So if you're an executive director, think about in relationship to your board. If you're in a leadership position, thinking about in relationship to the person who directly supports you. If you're a case manager frontline, thinking about it in terms of your manager or team lead. And I want you to number them from 1 to 4 in what is most important to you to least important to you. Now, they might all be important, but I really want you to think about and number them from 1 to 4. Is having trust and your boss trusting you the most important to you, or feeling empowered most important to you? Or is it really important that your boss shows you appreciation, or to have accountability and you know your boss is going to follow through with what they say and they know that you're going to follow through with what you say? And number them, like I said, from 1 to 4, 1 being the most important to you and 4 being the least. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I'd like you to do the same thing in relationship to the person with lived experience on your team. Peer support. If you are working alongside them and or if you're the person that's supporting them. If you don't have lived experience on your team yet, think about if you're going to implement peer support and lived experience on your team. Which one of these things would be the most important for you to have with that person of lived experience? Do you want to be able to trust them? First, most important, empower them. Do you want to be able to show appreciation to them? Do you want to ensure they're accountable? So number those 1 to 4 and see which one, where they fit for you. This really works well when we can open it up and just have really clear honesty with ourselves to see where is that? And then go back and take a look at the one that you did first in relationship to your boss. Is it different? Are the numbers different of what's most important for you in relationship to your boss versus with you in relationship to the person with lived experience? And if they are, take a moment to ask yourself why. Why is there a difference between what you need and what you feel you need from that person with lived experience? Because it's really important for us to take a look at our environments and the environments we're created within our staffing teams so that we can do fantastic, positive work out in the community with people in our program. Toxic environments cause significant aggression or depression, and what is toxic to one person may not be toxic to somebody else. But toxic environments really result in power over people. When we have tolerated environments, we see that people are depressed and have given up, and we often see a learned helplessness. But I really can't do that. No one is really going to care anyway. In tolerated environments, there's really very little growth happening, and we're just kind of stagnant. In a supportive environment, there is growth, and people may have moved out of toxic or tolerated and blossomed. There's power with people and not over people. This needs to be the minimum for every person that is doing this work on their teams, as well as for people in the program we work with. Now, a healing environment really needs to be created for some people who are wounded by toxic or tolerated settings. If they've worked in places, they've lived in places that have been very toxic to them, there might need to be more focus on restoration and wellness as we're doing this work. Again, toxic and tolerated result in power over. Supportive and healing result in power with. We really need to have the minimum of a supportive environment when we're working with people who are experiencing homelessness, when we're incorporating peer support and lived experience in our team, and with all of our team doing this work. Because when we include people with lived experience, we know and understand that peer support are really the purveyors of hope. People will see themselves resonated within the program. They will feel that somebody gets it. They've been here. And maybe if they can get to this point and they were able to move forward out of the circumstances that they were in, maybe I can too. They will understand that their choices matter. Hope, belonging, purpose. That's what we're doing here, folks. Peer support can help people feel understood and that there's hope to live the life of their choosing. Now, being person-centered with people who receive your supports and with people who work together to provide those supports, we not only change the way we think about things, but we lose those biases that we hold. And sometimes those biases are hard to let go of. So how do we leave them at the door? And there are many times that I have had to check myself and say, okay, what am I thinking right now? And I just need to set that aside. And how can I support this person in a positive way? So take a moment as we wrap up here to think about what's important to you about ending homelessness. What should others on your team do to support you? Do you know these answers for every single member of your team? Do you know what's important to each and every person? Because everybody has infinite worth. What are our biases? How can we leave them at the door? What's important to each and every person? We all have infinite worth. And once we start seeing it in ourselves, we start seeing it in others. Including peer support on your team is a vital element of this work that we do, and using their skills, gifts, and attributes, along with the clinical and professional other things that are brought forward from people who have social work degrees and PhDs and master's degrees, as well as people that have the LE behind their name. I'm Carrie O'Flynn Barch, and I run Pivotal Training and Facilitation. I work at Canadian Mental Health Northwest Region here in Grand Prairie, Alberta. I sit with Al Weeb on the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network. And thank you so much for being with us today. And we welcome your questions and anything else that you guys want to chat about. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to